All right, hello everybody. We are going to get started. Please don't sit on the stairs. It's a fire hazard, so if you can just stand in the back, that's fine, but don't sit. Hi, I'm Shiloh Brooks, and I'm the Executive Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions and a lecturer in the Department of Politics here at Princeton. And I can't tell you how happy we are to welcome you to the 2025 James Madison Program Reunions event. We always love to have our alumni back. This year, I should add, marks the 25th anniversary of the James Madison Program. I tell you, oh, thank you. Please, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're unique here at Princeton in that we take $0, no money, from the university's budget. We've been funded by the generosity of our friends and alumni for 25 years. So if you're interested in supporting us in our next 25, you can contact me or anybody on our staff, and we can ensure that 100% of your contribution goes to the program. If you're not familiar with the Madison program, let me tell you a little bit about what we do. We're dedicated to exploring enduring questions of American constitutional law and Western political thought. Student enrollment in our courses exceeded 400 this past year. Our events drew thousands of attendees. Our podcast, Madison's Notes, was downloaded almost 124,000 times, and our YouTube channel received over 102,000 views. I would say we're having an impact. We fund tens of thousands of dollars in undergraduate research at Princeton. We take undergraduates to hear oral argument at the Supreme Court. We take them to Oxford University for seminars on great books. We host visiting researchers from universities across the world. It's quite an operation, and it's an extraordinary thing. If you would like to learn more about everything we do, you can check out our website, jmp.princeton.edu, or follow us on X at Madison Program. Before we begin, I've been asked by the university to read a statement about Princeton's free expression values. So that statement runs as follows, quote, "Members of the Princeton University community and visitors have broad freedom to express themselves in a manner consistent with the university's policies. At the same time, university policies prohibit conduct that, among other things, disrupts university operations and activities. To be clear, any individuals who disrupt this event are in violation of university policy, subject to disciplinary action, and will be asked to leave the premises immediately. If they do not leave immediately, they will be considered a defiant trespasser under New Jersey criminal law and subject to arrest," end quote. With that out of the way, let me say, you're all gonna be arrested. No, I'm just kidding. It's all gonna be okay, I promise. With that out of the way, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our two speakers today, Professor Robert George and Professor Cornel West. You gotta, all right. You gotta let me tell you a little bit about him. Hang on a minute, you gotta let me tell you about him. Robert George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. He's taught also at Harvard Law School. He has served as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and as a presidential appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He's also served on the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics and as a U.S. member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Science and Technology. He was a judicial fellow at the Supreme Court of the United States, where he received the Justice Tom C. Clark Award. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Swarthmore College, he holds the degrees of JD and MTS from Harvard and the degrees of DPhil, BCL, DCL, and DLit from Oxford University, in addition to 23 honorary degrees. Professor George is a recipient of the U.S. Presidential Citizens Medal, the Honorific Medal for the Defense of Human Rights of the Republic of Poland, and a Berry Prize for Distinguished Scholarly Achievement of the American Academy of Sciences and Letters, among many other awards. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and of counsel to the law firm of Robbins and McElwee. Cornel West is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Professor of Philosophy and Christian Practice at Union Theological Seminary. He's also class of 1943 Professor of African American Studies Emeritus at Princeton University. He is a magna... He is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. Professor West is best known for his classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters. His memoir is entitled Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. He made his film debut in The Matrix and was the commentator with Ken Wilber on the official trilogy released in 2004. He has made several spoken word albums, including Never Forget, collaborating with Prince, Jill Scott, Andre 3000, Bootsy Collins, and others. In 2021, he won a Grammy, along with Arturo O'Farrill, for the year's Best Latin Jazz Album. Professor West has a passion to communicate to keep alive the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. Recently, Professor West received the high honor of being invited to give the Gifford Lectures in Scotland, known as the Nobel Prize of Philosophic Lectures. These two gentlemen have recently published a book together titled Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division, which is available for purchase just outside this room. Professors George and West will also be signing copies after the event, so make sure to stop by and get your copy signed. And let me say now that when we end the event, stay in your seat. We're gonna let them get up, go out to the front to take a seat, and then we'll release you to go on your way. That way you don't mob them, as I know you all want to do, when they go up the stairs. So we're gonna just stay seated at the end. I'll come up here when we're done and announce that again. The discussion today is entitled Truth Matters, Fruitful Disagreement in an Age of Division. Please join me in welcoming Professor George and Professor West.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. The very first thing I want to do is a bittersweet pleasure, and that is to thank Shiloh Brooks for his 3 years as a very distinguished and effective executive director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. It's bittersweet because we have recently learned in the last week that Shiloh will be leaving the Madison program in Princeton University. Unfortunately, his excellence and his success came to the attention of President George W. Bush and the people at the George W. Bush Presidential Library and Center. So they reached out to Shiloh and have stolen him. He will become the president and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Library and Center. Please join me in thanking Shiloh. How are you going to keep them down on the farm when they've seen Paris? So there we are. Second thing is to welcome back our wonderful alumni. It is so good to see so many alums from so many classes. It's great to visit with old friends and to meet new friends. If this is your first experience with the Madison program, I hope it will be a good one and that you'll visit us many times, visit our website, learn about what we do, become part of the family. And then it's a real treat to welcome these young men and women in the front who are students from the Mount Academy, the Bruderhof Communities School in New York. It's a pleasure to have you here, you young men and women. Thank you for coming. And it is always a joy and a treat to welcome back to Princeton America's premier public intellectual and my very, very, very dear friend and brother, Cornel West. Here's how one of the great blessings in my life occurred. The blessing of the friendship that Cornel and I have developed and the work that we have done together. It was back in 2005, Brother Cornel, when a student of ours, I don't know if he's here at the reunions, but I remember him so well. He was a wonderful student. He had been a student in Cornel's classes. He'd been a student in my classes. Andrew Perlmutter. Andrew came by my office during office hours. And he said, Professor George, can I have a minute with you? And I said, well, certainly, Andrew. So he came in, and he said, we're starting a new student newspaper. It's going to be, or magazine, student magazine. It's going to be called The Green Light. And it's going to be a magazine of culture and arts and politics and literature, sort of our own campus version of the New Yorker. Now, I'd been at Princeton by that point long enough to know that when a Princeton student says they're going to do something like that, they do it. So you don't laugh. They do it. So he was going to put together with some of his pals this magazine, which they did. And I said, well, that sounds like a wonderful idea. Is there any way I can help you? I thought he was going to ask me to be faculty advisor or something like that. But no, he said, well, yes, that's why I'm here. You can help me. He said, we want to make as a feature in each issue of the Green Light an interview of one Princeton faculty member by another Princeton faculty member. And we have selected as our very first interviewer Professor Cornel West. And we asked Professor West to choose his interview subject. We asked him, who would you like to interview? And he said he would like to interview you. Well, I was very flattered. I mean, the great Cornel West wanted to interview little old me from West Virginia. So I said, well, Andrew, let me make sure I understand this. You're saying that Professor West was invited to interview anybody he wanted on the Princeton faculty, and he said he wanted to interview me? And he said, yes. And I said, wow, well, of course I'd be happy to do that. So we arranged for the interview. Cornel came to my office over in Old Corwin Hall, came with a photographer. Do you remember that photographer? He must have snapped 2,000 pictures. I wonder where those pictures are. And he came with an old-fashioned cassette tape recorder. That won't mean anything to you young people, but some folks of my generation will know what a cassette tape recorder is. And we were going to have, I think it was an hour interview. Began at 2 o'clock. So Andrew put his cassette tape recorder down on the table, and he pushed the button, sat back in his chair, and said, go. Well, Cornel then commenced the, quote, interview, unquote. There's no interview. This was a rambunctious, rockin' and rollin' argument and conversation about every issue you can think of, current affairs, literature, history, philosophy. After a half hour, that tape snapped off, and Andrew jumped up, waving his arm. Stop, wait, don't say anything. Flipped that tape back over and said, go. So we went for another half hour, and now we were really into it. And so, you know, I assume, I don't remember hearing the click, but I assume half hour later the tape clicked off. But once you get two guys like this going, we're not stopping. I finally look at my watch. It's 6 o'clock. We've been going for 4 hours. Andrew's sitting there, photographer snapping a photo. And I said, well, Brother Cornel, this has been a wonderful conversation, but it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to have to go home for dinner. You know, this has really been great. We need to get to know each other better. We should get together for lunch or have coffee. And he said, oh, yes, Brother Robbie, we really need to do that. Let's make it a point to get to know each other better. Let's have a meal or something like that. And I said, well, can you walk me to my car? We can continue the conversation. I'm parked over here by the Princeton University Press on William Street. So he and I walk down, and we get at it again. We got to my car, and I sit there with my hand on the latch 45 minutes. Finally, I said, you know, my wife's going to call the police, put out an all-points bulletin. Where is he? So finally we parted. I headed home. Now, just a few days later, serendipity, some of the senior members of the faculty got a note from the dean of the college, the great Nancy Malkiel. Some of you will remember Dean Malkiel, Professor Malkiel. She was a professor, I believe, in psychology or history. History, and then went on to be very distinguished dean. Black history.
She's a Jewish sister in black history.
Yeah, there you are.
She had a lot to say.
Is this a great country? Or
She had a lot of powerful
and her
things
note
to say.
said, we want to encourage more of our senior faculty to teach freshman seminars. The freshman seminar program has become a very important part of our curricular offerings here at Princeton. And we use it to attract students. We're competing with Harvard or Yale or Stanford to get here at Princeton. And we tell the students that as Princeton students, with our focus on undergraduate education, You're taught by professors, not by graduate students from the very start, and even freshmen have opportunities to study with the most eminent and famous of our professors. She said the problem was we actually aren't making so good on that promise, so we need more of you to volunteer to teach freshman seminars. Well, at that point, the light bulb went off over my head, and I said to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if Brother Cornel and I could continue that conversation with a group of 16 or 18 of these brilliant young kids coming to Princeton as freshmen. So I got in touch with Cornel and said, we got this note from Nancy Malkiel about teaching freshman seminars. Why don't we teach one together? Let's do a kind of great books approach. Each of us will choose 6 books. We'll make them books that have been important in our own intellectual odysseys, and then we'll discuss for 3 hours once a week in the seminar the ideas of these great books with the students. And Cornel said, that'd be a wonderful thing to do. Let's go for it. So we agreed to teach the seminar together. He chose his 6, I chose my 6. I now can't remember who chose what, but we started with Sophocles' Antigone. We read Plato's Gorgias. I'm pretty sure I chose that one because that was such an important book in my own intellectual journey. We had them read St. Augustine, Confessions, and all the way up to the 19th century with figures like John Stuart Mill and John Henry Newman, and into the 20th century with C.S. Lewis and John Dewey, Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History, Martin Luther King. And it was a wonderful experience. From the moment that first seminar began, I could tell that this combination, these 2 guys, for all our faults, you've heard of people who have chemistry together? We had magic. And I would look forward to every Wednesday. We had them Wednesday evenings. We'd get together for dinner before the seminar over at the Triumph Brewery, and we'd start working on the subject right there, and then we'd head over and join the seminar with the students, and it was just a fantastic, fantastic experience. So once we knew we had a good thing going, we just kept doing it until Cornel abandoned me to go to Harvard, and even then, on his first sabbatical, he came down and we taught the seminar again. But at that point, we thought we'll just take the show on the road. So we're celebrating our 20th anniversary here in 2025.
That's good. Oh, that's so very true.
So we've been teaching together, lecturing together, singing together, praying together, arguing together for 2 decades. And much of that is summed up in the book here, Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division. And with that, I'm just going to turn the microphone over to Brother Cornel and invite him to say a few words to launch us.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I want to say is I thank each and every one of you for being here this morning. And I salute the class of 2025.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All of you are coming back for a reunion because Princeton has been very, very good to me in my life. I arrived here 52 years ago as a graduate student. I will never, ever forget magnificent love and affirmation that was poured into me by the Richard Rortys and Sheldon Wolins and Thomas Nagels and Tim Scanlons and Alder Kaufmans. Go on and on and on. These were towering figures. This was really the golden age of the philosophy department at Princeton. And to be a part of that was so intellectually exciting, as well as morally and spiritually. And of course, my dear Brother Robbie here, who I selected him not because I had political agreements. I love him, even though he's wrong on a number of things. I respect him because he's a brother of integrity and honesty and decency. And in a moment of such overwhelming spiritual decay and moral decrepitude with so many people pose and posture, he says what he means and means what he says. That makes a difference. That makes a difference. You see. Even though you might have political disagreement, character matters. Character matters. And so we have more than just a friendship. We have more than just a partnership. He's my brother. I am his brother. And many a times he's accepted my phone call to bail me out of jail. Many occasions. First one I call, oh, you calling your conservative brother? I'm calling my reliable brother. No, I've got reliable leftist comrades too, but the important thing is it's the love, and this is especially true for the younger generation, and to see the Bruderhoff younger brothers and sisters full of so much love, but that great tradition that you come out of. Very crucial in this moment, because so much of life these days, especially for young people, is a joyless quest for insatiable pleasure. Getting access to any kind of pleasure in the world, and your heart is still empty, and your soul is still vacuous, because richness has to do with having things that money cannot buy. That's what real richness is. And being able to spend time with a spiritually rich brother, given whatever political disagreements, and our strong overlap. Not just because we're Christians, and he's Thomistic Catholic, and I'm Kierkegaardian Baptist. So those are fascinating strands within a rich Christian tradition. And we struggle over that, and we see this in the text.
Yeah, we do.
But in our moment in which there's such polarization, in which empathy itself is often viewed as the enemy and cruelty itself is viewed as the strategy, the beautiful thing to make the human connection at the deepest level. And as true as you can see, it's ebony and ivory. It cuts across race, cuts across politics, cuts across denominations in the Christian tradition. But at the deepest human level, it's there, and we find our commonality in the deep, deep quest, not just for truth, but for beauty, for goodness, and the holy. And when I come back to Princeton, I think, of course, of my beloved daughter, who's a summa cum laude graduate of Princeton and now a third year graduate student in the German department here, who's very much a kind of niece to Brother Robbie. And that's also part of the rich family overlap. And we see it as well in our wives spending time together with Anahita and Cindy and the others, very crucial, and Sister Kathleen and Sister Debbie and the others working together to facilitate the kinds of works that we do. And it makes a big difference. It really does. And I've learned so much from Brother Robbie. People ask us all the time, has he changed your mind in regard to this particular issue? And I said, you see, when you're engaged in deep intellectual dialogue, you're trying to get inside of the skin of the other person, not primarily just to have your mind changed, but to understand how they go through their thinking, connected to their empathy, so that you see things that you are missing. So even if we don't change each other's minds, we able to gain access to insights we would not have had if we were not engaging each other. And there are certain things like, I thought Vico was the greatest Italian philosopher. Now I think Aquinas is. That's Brother Robbie.
You're welcome.
That's Brother Robbie. He's got a deeper appreciation of Kierkegaard and Howard Thurman. He already was in love with Martin Luther King Jr., who we included in our course every time that we taught.
Letter from Birmingham jail.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful thing to see the students who come back from the classes and talk about the course. It really is a beautiful thing. I mean, and there are moments you'll see when our eyes weep because we mention a Matthew Arnold or John Ruskin or a William Morris, and they'll say, we've never heard of those figures. And we say, then we're failing you as students. Because there's a whole host of figures you have to be highly acquainted with at least in the history of the West. And of course, the East has its great traditions. Africa has its great traditions. Indigenous peoples have their great traditions. But in the West, if you haven't had a chance to immerse yourself in the deep formulations of so many of the texts that we talked about, the Plato's, the Aristotle's, the Augustine, the Descartes, and the Nietzsche's, and Hegel's, and Marx's, and others, then we wonder what's going on at Princeton. Maybe I should just stop there, though, brother.
Well, the title of the book, Truth Matters, really reflects the shared commitment, the deep core shared commitment. Despite our many ideological or political differences, we both believe that truth matters. That is to say, it is essential to the extent that we frail, fallible, fallen human beings can do it. It is essential that we try to be in touch with reality, with truth, that we don't live in a fantasy, in a fabrication, in a fiction, that to the extent possible we know the truth whether it pleases us or not. You may be familiar with that old aphorism. It's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. You could live in a fantasy world. You could not care about truth. You could only believe what it would be nice to believe, or what you want to believe, or what your tribe or clan or group believes, or what your culture tells you. You could do that. That's possible. We see it all the time, and we're all tempted to it. But the proposition that we hold is that that is a failure to be what a human being at his or her best can be, and that is a determined truth seeker and a courageous truth speaker. To the extent that we can get hold of the truth about all matters, science, ethics, politics, history, literature, to the extent that we can get at it, to the extent that we can swap out the falsehoods that we have in our heads and replace them with truths, we are better off, and our communities are better off. You might call that an article of faith, fine, but that is our shared faith in the importance of truth, that truth matters. Now, we believe truth matters for everybody, not just for students, not just for scholars, not just for institutions like universities. That truth has a kind of priority for all of us, and it must regulate our lives, what we do with others, how we treat others, what we do even in the privacy of our own minds and thoughts. We should strive to be in touch with truth. But there's a special sense in which truth matters for scholars, for students, for institutions that claim to be colleges or universities. In the case of individuals, scholars like ourselves, truth-seeking is our vocation. It's what we're fundamentally called to do. For anyone who is a student, and we hope that all students will be lifelong learners, in a certain sense, lifelong students, but certainly for the period in which you are students, your vocation is truth-seeking. It's trying to get in touch with reality across all the areas of human endeavor and human life. And there's a special sense in which truth matters for universities. Truth-seeking is the very mission of the university. Now, universities can do, and indeed they do, lots of other things. Athletics and arts and clubs of every description. There's the chess club, there's the ballet club, there's the Democrats, there's the Republicans, there's the socialists, there's the libertarians, and all that is fine. But none of those things is the central defining mission of the university. The central defining mission of the university is truth seeking. President Eisgruber has made this point time and time again. He makes it every year at the freshman orientation, and he's absolutely right to put the focus on that. Yes, we want our students to be successful. Yes, we want to provide an education that will equip them for success in their professional fields, in law, business, medicine, academia, whatever they're going into. Yes, we want them to have good jobs. Yes, we want them to make a lot of money. When you do, remember what Shiloh said about the James Madison program in America. But as important as those things are, all of them are secondary to the fundamental mission of the university, and that is truth-seeking. In the scholarship of the professors it hires, in part to conduct their research, and in the pedagogical mission, in the teaching, where our fundamental obligation and duty to fulfill our vocation as teachers is to form our young men and women to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. Now notice that our mission is not to get them to think like ourselves. And those of you who've been in courses with Cornel West or Robbie George know that we don't see it as our mission to get you to think the way we think. In fact, if you argue for a position that I hold, or in one of Cornel's classes, you argue for a position he holds, I or he will challenge you with the best arguments available that we know about on the other side. Why? Why? To confuse you? No, not to confuse you. Sometimes perhaps you've had Cornell students say, yeah, but what's the right answer? Well, they know what I think. They know what you think. We're pretty visible. You can easily look us up if you don't know what we think. But our job is not to get you to think what we think. Our job is to get you to think more deeply, more critically, which always includes self-critically, and above all, for yourselves. Not to mimic what we think. We are frail, fallible, fallen human beings. We can be wrong. Cornel's wrong all the time. It's very easy to be wrong. We need to form you to be truth seekers. We need to equip you and empower you to be truth seekers. And that's not something we can do for you, truth seeking. You got to do it for yourself. We can encourage, we can equip, we can empower. But at the end of the day, you've got to do it for yourself. And that really does mean thinking for yourself. Now, what is required to do that? In the book, Cornel and I put quite a bit of emphasis on a couple of virtues that are necessary if anyone is to be a determined truth seeker and a courageous truth speaker. One of those, the very first one, the one that gets you in the door, is intellectual humility. That is the recognition that we are, in fact, all of us, that I am, in fact, a fallible person. And to make that affirmation not merely notional, that is, you check the right box on the true-false test. Are you infallible, true-false? It's easy to check the right box there. Of course, we all know we're fallible. But have we gone beyond the mere notional affirmation of our fallibility to affirm it existentially? If we have, there's a way of knowing that. And that is, we will always be open to an intellectual challenge. No matter how deeply held our belief is, no matter how much we cherish that belief, no matter how central we consider that belief to be to our very identity, if we have an existential grasp of our true fallibility, we will always be open to challenge, even on the stuff that's most important and most important to us. That is intellectual humility. I've never met a truly great scholar who doesn't have it. You cannot be a truly great scholar who doesn't have it. Secondly, we put a lot of emphasis on the virtue of courage, because it does take courage to be a determined truth seeker, and certainly to be a courageous truth speaker. Because guess what? If you're a determined truth seeker, you're going to arrive at truths that are uncomfortable, that contradict what is widely believed by other people, or contradict what is believed in our tribe or our group or our community. Tribes and groups and communities that help to form our identities. Tribes and groups and communities where being accepted as part of the group really matters to us, and where we are loath to put our good standing in that community at risk by dissenting from a position that the community has decided to take. That takes courage. It really does take courage. And even if you're a true truth seeker, wrestling with yourself takes courage. Because we human beings, and it's not a bad thing, but it's a real thing, we tend to wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. In that sense, our convictions really do become identity forming for us. But if we're open to changing our minds, if we're open to challenge, if we're open to criticism, if we're really willing to consider that we might be wrong and have to change our views, that means we don't know where we are going to end up at the end of the day. We may be in a very different place, a place that from our perspective right now sounds like a very uncomfortable place to be. It's like getting on a train and not knowing where you're going to get off. Here you're getting on the train and not knowing who you're going to be when you get off. Can people genuinely be that courageous? It's hard, and yet that kind of courage must be mustered if we're to fulfill our truth-seeking vocations. And then finally, what about institutions? And here Cornel and I have both been very outspoken, individually and together. If institutions are to fulfill, colleges and universities are to fulfill their truth-seeking missions, then they have to create climates, environments in which people are free and feel free to challenge any opinion, no matter how widely held that opinion is on campus, no matter how orthodox it has become, no matter how much people hate to hear that opinion challenged, no matter how offended people will be if you state that point of view. A university must embrace a culture of freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, freedom of discussion. Without it, the truth-seeking mission is lost, and education becomes indoctrination. The very antithesis of education. So you need that climate of open dialogue, open inquiry. Cornel and I try to model that in our own relationship and in the work we do when we're teaching together. We argue for it in the book. I'm proud that Princeton was the second university, after the University of Chicago itself, to adopt the University of Chicago free speech principles. Those principles do protect the right of every person on our campus, faculty, student, and staff, to challenge any idea, to criticize any orthodoxy. All that we ask is that you respect other people by doing business in the proper currency of intellectual discourse. There's a currency of intellectual discourse, just as there's an economic currency. Pounds and pence in Britain, dollars and cents in the United States. What is the currency of intellectual discourse? The proper currency consists of reasons, evidence, and arguments. You look at Princeton's policies, our formal policies, that's all we ask. You can't shout at people and call them names. You can't defame people. You can't threaten. You can't intimidate. None of those are acceptable. But we allow no viewpoint-based restrictions on speech. Why? Is it because we think there is no truth? No. The opposite. It's because we know we are fallible, all of us, and therefore we know that the only way we're going to get nearer the truth or deepen our understanding of the truth, however partial it is, and it can never be complete, we need an atmosphere of freedom in order to do that. Now, it's great to have those principles written on the page. It really is. It's necessary. That's why I myself was involved in pushing to get Princeton to adopt these principles. But having them is necessary but not sufficient. Beyond the written words protecting our freedom on the page is the culture of freedom that has to be in place so that those guarantees in the books are not mere parchment guarantees, that they are alive in the culture of the institution. We could have the best Bill of Rights. The Soviet Union had a wonderful Bill of Rights. Nino Scalia used to carry around a copy of the, Justice Scalia used to carry around a copy of the Soviet Constitution, and he'd pull it out for audiences like this, and he'd start reading, freedom of speech shall be respected, freedom of religion will be respected. Oh yeah, the words on the page were great, but they were meaningless. They were mere parchment guarantees because the truth was repression. And repression can come not only from a central authority, but as John Stuart Mill said in his wonderful and famous essay on liberty, it can come from the culture. There can be a tyranny of the majority. There can be an atmosphere of suffocation where no one feels safe to express an opinion. That's why I get so worried, as I know Cornel does, when we see poll results, including here at Princeton, where students and sometimes even faculty in large numbers report that they self-censor. We should be ashamed that anybody at Princeton feels the need to self-censor. To pursue our truth-seeking mission as an institution, our students and our faculty have to feel free to speak their minds, whatever they have on their minds, to put their arguments forward, to play the devil's advocate, to challenge ideas, no matter how orthodox they are. That's an atmosphere conducive to learning. Cornel?
Oh, indeed, indeed, indeed. I think Brother Robbie and I begin with the notion that we're cracked vessels. And I mean, as Christians, we're just trying to love our crooked neighbor with our crooked hearts, as W.H. Auden would put it. But at the same time, we recognize that whatever we come up with individually, socially, or institutionally, it will be in some sense a relative failure. When Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. That's the story of our lives. That's even the story of Princeton. Scottish Presbyterians. How many non-Presbyterians will you allow? How many Catholics will get in? What about the Jewish brothers and sisters? Quota. What about the black folk? Oh, Lord, we ain't even thought about that. You got enslavement and Jim Crow. What about women? The vast majority of the country, of the species. We'll work that out. But that doesn't mean that Princeton doesn't have much to offer. Because a relative failure is a self-critical moment of recognizing you are still aspiring to ideals that you know you will only approximate. And what does that mean? That means that none of us have grounds for self-righteousness. None of us have grounds for purity and pristine status. So what does that do? That calls into question Manichaean thinking, that somehow all the folk over there have all the bad stuff and only we folk here have the good stuff. No, if you're a cracked vessel, and every institution, every social experiment, every democratic experiment has its failures and successes contending in its past and its present, and the best will never emerge if you're not self-critical enough, humble enough, and then that courage which enables all, the virtue that enables all the other virtues, which is courage. Now, what's very interesting in Plato's Laches, when he raises the question, what is courage? The only time he mentions the phrase, musical life. The courageous life is the musical life. Now, this is the Plato. It's my brother Charles, my wonderful student here, and he's here somewhere around. I don't know if he's in the room here, though. But we used to talk about this in office hours for hours. Why does Plato ban the flute in the Republic? Not just most of the poets, only the poets who write hymns to God and hymns to great men, but the flute. Why is it that the artists and musicians are such a challenge to order? I didn't say justice, order. And it's partly because I come from a people whose anthem, black people's anthem, is what? Lift every voice. Not lift every echo, is it? What happens when we lose the capacity to muster the courage to lift our voices, to be truth pursuers and beauty lovers, and simply become echoes, which are nothing but extension of silos, which are nothing but imitations of what has been drilled into you. So it's indoctrination rather than deep education, which is paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. That's what Plato talks about, paideia. What is paideia? It is precisely that formation of attention, that cultivation of critical consciousness, and that formation of a loving, compassionate soul. So to the young folk, what kind of human beings are you all going to be from your mama's womb to tomb? That's the crucial question. Courage, love, integrity, honesty. Any institution, even in the Bruderhof, my hunch is you've got some sinfulness operating. Is that right, my dear brother? Now, if that's happening in the Bruderhof, you can imagine what's happening at Princeton or any other place. So the question becomes, the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. And that suffering, and Robbie and I are deeply committed to Margot Day, the fact that each and every human being, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation, nation, country, has the same sanctity and dignity made in the image of a loving, mighty God. That's something we hold on for dear life. And we know that's always an aspiration. That's one reason why when we spend time together, we read our T.S. Eliot, we're listening to Coltrane. He plays a serious banjo, bluegrass, and I've been incorporated into the bluegrass culture. I appreciate that, brother. He's been incorporated into rhythm and blues and jazz in a number of different ways because the love spills over into our quest for beauty, but it is an acknowledgement of the need to cultivate courage. And unfortunately, in universities, it is not just a recent thing, but our universities have become so commodified, so obsessed with money, so professionalized, and professional cultures tend to put a premium on conformity, not courage. That's just what it is to become a professional. That's why we begin our course with Socrates on the one hand and Jesus on the other. Now, how would both of them fare at Princeton? The unexamined life is not worth living. I'm going to question every claim. No safe spaces for Socrates.
Safe spaces.
Socratic spaces, yes. People enter with respect, everyone to be respected, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation, absolutely, but not safe. Because when you read Plato, you read Dante, you read Toni Morrison, you read William Faulkner, you read Thomas Mann, you will be shaking, and sometimes your worldview will rest on pudding. That's called education. And then you find out where you stand. You find your voice, just like a blues woman or a jazz man. You can't be neither if you're just an echo. You got to find your voice, and every voice is like your fingerprint, distinctly you. And Robbie and I tell our students all the time, there's no one in the world like you. And you come in our classroom to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. And when you learn how to die, it means, in fact, that you are continually calling yourself into question, which is a form of death And the new birth takes the form of the new person you become as a result of living the questions in the language of Rilke. And so that's what it is. To learn how to live is to learn how to die. And of course, Christians, New Testament says what? The Jewish brother Paul, who wrote in those letters, Christians must learn how to die daily. That was a eulogy that the great Dorothy Day, vanilla Catholic sister, wrote for Martin Luther King Jr. when he died. Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily, because all of us have something in us that needs to die. It's like when you fall in love, young folk. Something inside of you's gonna die. All daily. That narcissism and all of that selfishness, and you think you at the center in the universe, and lo and behold, something starts happening inside of you and say, ooh, this dying is a beautiful thing because I'm also being reborn, tied to somebody other than just me. And so it is in our vocations. And it's very interesting that vocation, I think about the two great essays of Max Weber in 1917, 1919 on vocation, science as vocation, politics as vocation, starting point. Because it has to do not just with voice and courage as virtue, but it has to do with cause. And so often Robbie and I have young folk coming up to us all the time. What is your brand? What is your brand? You all have a magnificent brand. We just love your brand. And we say, we don't have a brand. We have a cause. You don't have a market strategy just for upward mobility. We have nothing against upward mobility. You can see we don't opt for voluntary poverty, which we have a great respect for. God bless the Pope and others. Well, I guess he's not locked into voluntary poverty at the moment, but he comes out of that great Augustinian tradition that's tied to St. Francis of Assisi, that's tied to Mother Teresa and so forth and so on. But most importantly, brand and talk about brand has become so dominant. And you can imagine for me, right, African folk on those plantations, on those ships, on those slave auctions were branded. 244 years branded. So don't ask me what my brand is. What is my cause? Well, as for truth, beauty. And then as Christians, it's the kingdom of God. And I learned in Vacation Bible School at Shiloh Baptist Church that if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. I believe that. In that sense, I'm a fundamentalist Christian. Now, I got a whole lot of fellow citizens who are Christians who haven't got that memo. I understand that. I still love them, they're wrong. We fight it out. And the same is true across the board. And at this particular moment, of course, where we got certain issues that just coming at us in terms of different attacks on Harvard and Princeton and so forth. I know we'll get into some of that in the question and answer. And the student protests and the struggles over Gaza and wrestling with what it means to deal with war crimes, or genocide, or ethnic cleansing, whatever you want to call it. How do you stay in contact with human beings no matter who they are and recognize that an Israeli baby has the same value as a Palestinian baby, and a Palestinian baby has the same value as an Israeli baby, and it's not a political posturing. It's a moral and spiritual way of being in the world, which means you might not be popular in a variety of different camps, but it's not about popularity, it's about your moral and spiritual integrity. That's the kind of spiritual awakening I think that we need, especially as our democracy continually declines and decays spiritually and morally. I won't get into that in too many details, because we had to have a long 8-hour seminar just to touch the surface of it, learning from each other as we agree and disagree. But this is the kind of thing that Brother Robbie and I are blessed to do throughout the country. We've done it in Dallas on the chocolate side of town. I think we actually peaked and gave our best lectures to fifth graders. You remember that?
Fifth graders in a
Fifth
little
graders
all-black
in a
school.
all-black
In a
school.
place that was surrounded by barbed wire
Yeah.
fences. It was a neighborhood so dangerous that even the police were, unwilling to go into the neighborhood. And this couple, Dr. and Mrs.
The
Flowers,
flowers.
had created a school called St. Philip's. Some of you are from Dallas, probably know St. Philip's, where there you go, where they are giving these little kids, a true classical education. And these are in many cases, the children of drug addicts and prostitutes. I mean, the worst possible conditions, but they are working miracles every day. And Cornel and I were just blessed to be able to go. We've been there 2 or 3 times.
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, to
so.
go and to lecture there and to interact with the students and listen to their questions. They were among the best students we've ever had. Those
I know I
fifth
peaked. I
graders,
thought
yeah.
you were peaking too, though. I know I peaked. Oh, no, the eyes, you can just see in those eyes, windows of the soul. You can look inside of the soul of those precious young kids, and you see them being touched, their minds unsettled, and their hearts being empowered, and letting them know that we cared as well as trying to inform, because education is as much showing that you care, not just about the subject matter, but for them, and then recognizing we have no monopoly on truth. We in this together, so we let them speak.
Yeah, we walked by the principal's office, and the principal's office had a window. And on the window were a bunch of those stickers that you see on the back of people's BMWs that say Yale, Notre Dame, and so forth. But the window had Yale, Notre Dame, Williams, Stanford. And it's where some of the graduates of this school had gone to college and university. Absolutely extraordinary. Now, you remember Cornel. Let's see if you remember that. So we had, I think, the second graders up to the high school students, but they didn't have the first graders in. The first graders were doing something else. And as we finished our program with the older kids, and we were walking out, and here came a line of the first graders.
Yes.
Now, the little girls, they were in their uniforms like you are today. The little girls all had buckle shoes, and their shoes were buckled. But as Cornel and I were standing there, and they were marching past us, when the little boys came, we noticed most of the little boys didn't have their shoes tied. And, we're experienced fathers, so I looked at Cornel. Cornel looked at me. Neither of us said a word to each other. We went right down to our knees and started tying the little boys' shoes. And somebody snapped a picture of that went all over the internet of us tying those kids' shoes.
I had recommended that picture be on the cover. Am I lying, Robert?
No, you did. You actually did.
I said, we can't wash the feet. At least we can do is tie the shoes.
I remember a few years ago, Cornel and I were invited. We've never since been invited back, but the administration invited us here at Princeton to talk. Do you remember this? To freshman parents weekend, freshman families weekend, I think it was called.
Right.
And so we had all these wonderful new freshmen who were there. They'd only been here for about a month or so. It was October, if I recall correctly. And their parents were there. And of course, the parents were thrilled to death that their kids were at Princeton. And, this was going to be just a great thing for them. This was going to launch them in life. And gosh, Princeton degree. And think of all of what that means. So, Cornel and I were doing our pitch about, keeping things in perspective here, and that we need to avoid taking too much of a pre-professional attitude toward our education or an instrumental attitude toward our education. It's really not so much about, getting ahead and a great job and making a lot of money. I was the one speaking first, and I could just tell that I wasn't having an impact. I wasn't making the sale. There's certain
don't be so hard on yourself. You were having some impact.
So, finally, I just I looked over to Cornel and I said, because I had said, your kids are really here to get an education, a deep education, to wrestle with the great issues of life, the meaning of life, issues of life and death, meaning, value, human nature, the human good, not to get a job at Goldman Sachs. But I wasn't succeeding. So I looked over to Cornel and said, well, Cornel, you say what you think. And he said, the children are here to learn how to die.
No, that's true. That is true.
At which point I saw every father in the room turn to every mother and say, $70,000.
Oh, I do remember that.
But it is true that,
And Brother Chris was there too.
brother, that's right. That's probably why we've never been invited back to that.
No, I know. He understood what I was talking about. Oh, yes.
But we do have a message for our students. You know, we don't want to tell them what to think. It's not our job. It really is. This is not just a cliche, or if it's a cliche, it's a truth anyway. And that is, we're trying to empower you to think, make you think better, help you to think. It's not telling you what to think. You're going to have to decide what you think about this issue or that issue. Whether it's a political issue, whether it's an issue about the interpretation of a piece of literature, whether it's a question of religion, whatever it is, you're going to have to think for yourself. We're not going to tell you what to think. Going to help you to be a better thinker. But we do want to form our students in a certain sense morally. And that is to get them to at least wrestle with the possibility that there is a proper ordering of values. That there are some things that matter. They matter. Not they don't matter. There's some things that matter, but not all that much. Some things that matter, but not ultimately matter. So think of wealth, power, influence, celebrity, status. Now, those are not bad things. And aspiring to them, which if you've gotten into Princeton as a student, you've probably aspired to some of those things and probably are aspiring to those things. And it's not wrong. It's not bad. Those things aren't bad. In fact, think of the good you can do, and that many people do, with wealth. They build businesses. They employ people. They provide goods and services that people want and need. If they make a lot of money, they can support good causes. Same with celebrity, same with status. You can use those gifts, if they come your way, to do good things. So these things are not bad in themselves. They can be used for good. But the key thing to see, and that we want our students to see, is these things are not good in themselves. They matter, but they're not the things that ultimately matter. And we have to be careful about getting too caught up in those things. So we're so narrowly focused on them that we forget about the things that really matter. Now, what are the things that really matter? Family, faith, friendship, knowledge, beauty, integrity, honesty, decency, compassion. Those things really matter because they're not the things that are merely instrumentally valuable, good as means to other ends like wealth and power and status and fame. They're the things that matter for their own sakes. On your tombstone, what do you want it to say? Summa cum laude at Princeton, partner Goldman Sachs. I don't mean to beat up on Goldman Sachs. Partner Cravat, Swain and Moore. Or do you want it to say loving husband, valued father and grandfather, loyal friend? Which do you want it to say? We all want it to say the latter. So at a certain level, we all know what matters, but not all that much, and then what really matters, and we know the difference. And yet it is so easy in our culture, and not just in our culture. This is, I think, culturally, it transcends cultures and time. I think it's part of the human condition. We can get so caught up, and especially our young people, especially our super high achieving young people who do manage to grasp the brass ring, in the 3% of applicants who get into Princeton, who can get so focused on the instrumental things, on the CV values as opposed to the tombstone values, that they lose sight of the things that really matter. And it's just a question of keeping things in order. Again, it's not a Manichaean thing where you say, oh, aspiring to be wealthy, that's bad. Or aspiring to be famous, that's bad. Or aspiring to have higher social status, That's bad. Those are not bad. Those are good. It's okay to want them. It's fine to want them. You can do great things with them. But they're not the things that ultimately matter. So the teacher's job, if we are to achieve our goal of forming our students to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers, part of that job is a kind of moral formation. Again, it's not telling them what to think, but it's engaging them in a way that will make them think, and make them think not just about what's my next step in getting ahead, which began in kindergarten, but what really matters in life. What should I be? Who should I be? What kind of person should I be? How should I live my life? What really matters? And this is the great truth in Cornel's message to our students. And he says this in every seminar we've taught together, that the reason you're here is to learn how to die. The great truth is you're here to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. It was one of the Greeks, I can't remember whether it was Plato or Aristotle, or maybe one of the others, who said that we can only assess what matters in this life and make our decisions about how we're going to spend our time and our energy and our other resources against the horizon of our death. It's when we try to look at things knowing that we have a short span here on earth. It's rare if you live to be 90, and you're certainly not going to live to be 150. We just have a short time on this sphere. If you look at your decisions you have to make now from the perspective of your death, you will more likely to focus on the things that really matter as opposed to the things that matter but not all that much.
Absolutely.
Final word before we
I
open.
was just thinking of Seneca, associated with not just the Roman Empire. We don't associate empire building with profound philosophical reflection. So the Romans don't have figures that cut as deep as a Plato or a Pascal or a Dostoevsky or a Alfred North Whitehead or Coltrane or Toni Morrison. But Seneca says, he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. See, even the Romans can have deep insights here. Unlearn slavery. Because love is about freedom. Courage is about freedom. It's not about perfection. About freedom. And when we think of the greatest international figure associated with Princeton, I shall forever think of Albert Einstein. I could be just generationally biased, but I can make my case. When I went to Harvard as an undergrad, I had two figures on my wall. I had Malcolm X and I had Albert Einstein. Very different kind of brothers. But that dialectical tension was rich. And Einstein would say over and over again, imagination is more important than knowledge, but it's important to bring Einstein in because the crucial role of STEM and the weight and status of STEM among the younger generation that does not in any way preclude you for wrestling with what it means to be human. Integrity, honesty, decency, love, courage. Einstein recognized, but even in Socrates, who exemplifies some of the highest levels of intellectual courage and conscience and integrity. And even Nietzsche was in love with Socrates 3 days of the week. Yeah. Because he's complicated, but he has a love of Socrates in a certain sense. But what is it about Socrates? He never cries, he never sheds a tear. And anybody who's never shed a tear has never loved anybody. You can love wisdom until the cows come home. But when you're at the funeral of your precious mama, self-mastery may not be the major disposition. Nothing wrong with shedding tears. Einstein understood that. So when he moves to Hebrew scripture and Jesus as a secular thinker with his own spirituality and musical sense of acknowledging religious insights without being religious, he's spinozistic, and we won't get into that right now. But he recognizes those tears matter. When Jesus weeps, he weeps because what? He loves Lazarus, Jerusalem, the least of these, poor, tax collectors like one of those in his disciple network. He's loving everybody. And tears have their role. Einstein, dead 1955, still alive in so many ways in the legacy of this institution at its best. But Einstein has his faults and foibles too. He's got his blindnesses too. No one has a monopoly on truth, but his example is so powerful. And I can just say in my own life has played a very, very important role. He played a decent violin, which is nice. I mean, he wasn't Heifetz, let's just be honest about it. But he played a nice violin. But the crucial thing is he passed on a legacy to each and every one of us. Young high school students, graduates of Princeton, those coming back from the reunion, even during your moments between quasi-intoxication. Keep in mind the legacies of Socrates and Esther and Amos and Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and Gandhi, rich traditions, but coming down where you come down with your own voice. And that's very much what Brother Robbie and I have been about for 20 years.
Well, let's open the floor now. John's got a microphone over here. John, you have the mic? So, John, let me ask first if any of the students from the Mount would like to open us with a question. Does anybody have a question? Any of you young people? Yes, there's one. This young lady right over here. Thank you.
So at the beginning, you were talking about truth-seeking, but what exactly do you define as truth? Because one person's truth might not be another's.
Well, yes, one of the challenges that we have today is that some students will bring, just from the culture surrounding them, a kind of, casual relativism or casual subjectivism. They'll say, well, you have your truth and I have my truth, but there's no such thing as the truth. Well, is that proposition just your truth? My truth? No, it's being proposed as the truth. So just a moment of reflection on that whole approach should cause us to be skeptical whether there's any future in that way of thinking. The real challenge is not to defend truth. It's self-defeating, really, to deny it. No sentence is true. No one can speak the truth. The question is, what is the truth? And here we got a problem because the truth is often obscure. Sometimes it's clear, but it's very often obscure. And unfortunately, about the biggest and most important question, it tends to be the most obscure. So what is the best approach? Cornel and I are followers of Socrates. We thought he had the best approach. What does that approach consist of? There's a fancy label for it, it's a fancy name for it. The dialectical approach. What does that fancy name mean? It's just this. If we don't know whether a proposition is true or false, then what we need to do in order to get nearer to the truth, trying to figure out whether it's true or false, have the best shot, is to consider the best that's been said on one side of an argument or of the proposition and the best that can be said on the other side. Now, sometimes that will take place, as it does so often for Cornel and me, in an interpersonal context. He's defending one side of a proposition, I'm defending the other side. We genuinely believe what we're arguing, but both of us are open to the possibility that we can be wrong. So we're not trying to persuade the other guy so much as we're trying to get at the truth by this dialectical partnership. Both of us valuing more getting at the truth than convincing the other guy. You ask me, am I interested in convincing Cornel? No. I'm interested in getting at the truth of the thing. So if he's right and I'm wrong, I need him to convince me so that I can swap that falsehood out of my head for a truth. And he feels the same way about it. So in just about any domain, not just politics, let's say we're arguing about the interpretation of a certain passage in Chaucer. My friends in STEM, my friends in the sciences say that the same is true for much of science. Science has this image in the heads of non-scientists of being a dispute-free zone. You know, it just advances, people make the next advance and so forth. You know how those advances happen in many cases, even in science? By arguments that are then tested by scientific methods, people trying to get at the truth of things. So the question really isn't your truth and my truth. The question is, what is the truth? The trouble is, it can be obscure. That is compounded by the fact that we can never know it perfectly, infallibly, or fully. And yet, we can get nearer to it. We can at least get part of it. And the best way to do that is proceeding dialectically. And that's why we need those virtues of humility and courage. And that's why institutions need those conditions such as freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
Cornel, do you want to add anything?
One way of proceeding, though, is just saying, can't we agree that there are certain undeniable truths? And they say, what do you mean, Brother West? My hunch is you were born of a woman. Is that true? Well, it depends on how you interpret birth. No, I think there's a good chance that both of us were born of a woman. That's an undeniable truth. This group will never, ever reconvene again. It's undoable. That's called the passage of time. At this particular moment, something happened. We had a dialogue. It will never happen again. We'll never be able to go back. That's an undeniable truth. All of us will die. Now, I met some brothers who were selling immortality to me in Las Vegas last year. I'm serious. And was thoroughly convinced that if you gave him enough money, that immortality was available. He had some special juice and so forth. I said, well, I appreciate the creativity here, but my hunch is you're going to be dead just like me. Is that an undeniable truth? So at that point, we got something in common. Now, once you move toward the indeterminate and the more oblique and opaque and so forth, like in morality, then you have room for deep disagreement. So it looks like there's no truth. But you make your case because you're convinced that if you give up on truth, and all you've got is nihilism, all you've got is truthlessness, all you've got is meaninglessness, and in the end, all you've got is lovelessness. I've been blessed to teach in prison for 47 years. My first question I raised to the brothers is what? How many of you all would take a bullet for your mama? 99% of them stand up. I said, I got the right crowd.
Yeah.
Because they have a sense of what love is. And the love of their mama is true, as real as a heart attack. You see what I mean? And that's one way you can connect with the young folk. I love my mama. You love your mama. Oh, so you're not a relativist, are you? You do believe in some deep truths, do you? Yes, I do in that regard. But when it comes to these political issues, we have deep disagreements. Fine, we understand that. But you're able to proceed. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, thank you so very much. No,
a particular challenge that we face today is that people will sometimes believe that truth is ultimately a matter of how I feel. And my feelings, when my feelings become the criterion of truth, not faith, as in the age of faith, the Middle Ages, not reason, as in the Enlightenment, the age of reason or the age of science, but in an age of feeling, where feelings become the criterion of truth, conversation becomes impossible. Because you feel how you feel. There's nothing I can do about that. I can't even know how you feel. And then the temptation turns out to becomes being an authoritarian. Because I believe, based on my feelings, X. If you challenge X, then you're evil and a bad person, and you've got to be destroyed. And it can turn into the kind of authoritarianism that creates cancel culture and the attacks that we've seen on freedom of speech and academic freedom. Again, I go back to the point about freedom of speech. We honor freedom of speech, especially in universities, not because we believe there is no truth, and therefore anybody should be able to say anything they want. No, We honor it precisely because we believe that there is a truth and the truth matters. And it's important to get at the truth. And our best shot is to allow people to make the best arguments on one side and the best arguments on the other. And then thinking independently, each of us decides where we think the truth is. Okay, there's a guy's jumping out of his chair up there, right in the middle with a wonderful white jacket with the Princeton orange and black on it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great hat, too.
Appreciate it. In listening to your story, it seems like not only truth matters, but trust matters.
Ooh, yeah.
And I'm interested to hear more, whether the story about the interview or why Cornel Wesley would call Professor George to bail you out of jail. How do you build that sense of trust between one another?
Great question.
Brother, you hit the nail on the head. You really do. That bonds of trust must be forged so that one can feel as if one has an interlocutor or a companion in the common quest for truth, no matter how broken we are, no matter how cracked we are. Now, how do we forge bonds of trust? First thing you have to do is you have to be open enough to acknowledge that not one can be wrong, and to acknowledge that in this quest together, we will be involved in not just a quest for truth, but it will be worth it because you'll have some fun. You'll have a sense of adventure, and you'll have a sense of what it is to connect with others who themselves are unpredictable. You see, if your character is shaped thoroughly by transaction, domination, and manipulation, you'll never be able to generate trust. That's one of our problems right now. And I'm not just thinking about the White House. There's a whole lot of other houses that have challenges of trust. Because once you call into question the possibility of that sense of adventure and openness, and you're not in control, and you're not trying to impose, then you call into question the very conditions for the possibility of the kind of truth questioning that we're talking about. So you really hit the nail on the head. And you're right that we started with this deep moment of trust, just as, two crack vessels, two brothers, vanilla and chocolate.
So glad that you raised the issue because it really is so important, and we had not mentioned a word about it.
Absolutely.
But 2 weeks ago, we did. Cornel and I published an op-ed piece in the online journal, The Hill, which I'd commend to you. You could do a Google search and look it up. And trust features very heavily there. Let me tell you how it does. We made the point that universities today are so vulnerable to the kinds of things that are happening right now precisely because they lost the trust of the American people. And Cornel and I say it explicitly, that was not the fault of the American people. That was the fault of universities. Too much of what was going on in universities was and is a betrayal of the truth-seeking mission of the university. A betrayal of the very values that we have placed so much emphasis on when it comes to truth-seeking. A betrayal of those virtues that need to be in place. A betrayal of the conditions, especially the conditions of freedom of inquiry. Too many cases in universities had become public of people being punished for expressing dissenting opinions. Too many cases of unfairness, straight up unfairness. Viewpoint-based decisions in admissions, in hiring, in promotion, in tenure. And you can't hide that from the public forever. And institutions like universities, even private universities, even elite private universities, depend on the trust of the people. We can do great services, and our universities have. President Eisgruber is right about this. He's made this point many times. Universities, American universities have made enormous contributions. This university has made enormous contributions to the American way of life, to the good of our country, right? But that does not give us a permission slip. That history, and even the good that we do now, does not give us a permission slip to betray the values that make our university truly great. And so this is a time, Cornel and I say in the op-ed, and I do commend it to you, please do look it up. Cornel and I say this is a time, yes, for firmness in standing against external attacks on academic freedom, but also a time for self-examination and reform, because attacks on academic freedom have so often come in recent years from within the universities. So I think here it's really important to take a balanced view of it, soberly. Other
we
questions?
should just
Yeah,
add one thing. But it was a piece rejected by the New York Times.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Rejected by a whole host of newspapers that were part of different establishments. Isn't that something? And that's all we were trying to say.
Yeah.
That's all we were trying to say. And it's not like we unknown. So, I mean, I pray for the New York Times, but I just want to be honest with about it.
You know, that's so true. I mean, you know, I can get an op-ed, Cornel can get an op-ed piece in the New York Times or, you know, a conservative or liberal publication just by bashing the other side, right? If we bash the other side, if we tell one side of a story. The trouble with this piece, the reason it ended up in the Hill was perfectly good. I mean, I'm glad it was there.
Nothing against the Hill, nothing against the Hill.
Yeah. But, you know, this was a piece that told a complex story because we think the story is complex. There is fault on both sides. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear us, good, them, bad. But that's just not the truth. Christy, there's a hand up over here.
Following up on that, given the amount of polarization we have, and how do we take the model you're providing and get more people to understand and follow it?
It's a wonderful
Given
question.
how hard it is to speak to the middle.
Yeah, that's why we lift our voices, not just individually and singularly, but collectively and together. And we're also tied to a variety of different institutions, so we spend a lot of time in churches, in mosques, in synagogues, in community centers over the 20 years. And we've been blessed to have wonderful, decent coverage on television, not just individually in terms of us appearing, but as a couple. As a couple. In that sense, it's been decent, but we just have to do all that we can with what we have, though, brother. Very much so.
There's a statement attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. I don't know if it's authentic, but there's great truth in it. And the statement is, preach the gospel always. If necessary, use words. In my 4 decades, and Cornel's a little longer than mine, in my 4 decades and his 4+ decades, you know, we've both learned. You teach more, even as teachers, even as classroom teachers, even as lecturers. We teach more by example than by precept. Now, it's important to use words. It's important to teach by precept. But the example counts. So students, young people learn so much from example. Now, what role models are they seeing out there? Who are they seeing embodying the kinds of virtues that we have been trying to preach here? Not enough people. They need to see it much more broadly than they're seeing it now. So the ultimate solution is more people modeling and exemplifying. And that doesn't just mean people in the public eye like Cornel and myself. You know who it begins with? Mom and dad, grandma and grandpa,
That's right.
auntie and uncle, coach, pastor, teacher, librarian, the people who have the greatest influence on the lives of our young people. It's got to begin there. But it's much more effective to teach it by example than to just preach it.
That's so
Shiloh.
true. That's so true.
All right.
That's powerful. That's seeing sermon rather than hearing sermon.
Got it.
That's powerful.
Appreciate it.
So, right.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, thank you.
Lord. Brother, my brother. God bless you, man.
All right. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
my brother.
Thank you.